He was one of the good ones, or so they thought. Kenneth Tomlinson was the police captain and the local Boy Scout troop leader. He stood 6 foot 6 inches tall and weighed close to 400 pounds. He liked to call himself Big Dog. While all of the adults thought he was a good law-abiding citizen, all of the teenagers were wary of him. Maybe they should have paid attention to their children. The red flags were everywhere. On January 5th, 2010, he was arrested on 22 counts of SA of underage boys. He had been abusing boys for years after the troop meetings and then forcing them into silence. He was eventually sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences plus 22 years. Later, the victims' families sued the Boy Scout organization for negligence. There had been 60 incidences reported and ignored. When will we see through the facade and notice the red flags of abuse? Only then will we truly be protecting our children. This episode is brought to you by Chaos Rules in Madhouse, Madison County, Missouri. This rural community should be a safe place, but it hides a dark secret. Fredericktown is one of the most dangerous places to live in America. With a crime rate of 31 per 1,000 residents, Fredericktown has one of the highest crime rates compared to all communities of all sizes. I started researching one case sent to me by a desperate grandmother that led me to 15 more. Then I realized this county has had murder, corruption, and chaos since before the Wild West days. This book will start with a lynching by a Fredericktown mob in 1844 and will end up in an explosion. Hold on to your seats when you read this one. You're in for a wild, chaotic ride through rural Missouri. Check out my new book, Madhouse, Madison County, today.
We're going to go back to January of 2010. Now, January 2010 may sound like a familiar time frame, and it is, because just right after this story that we're going to talk about tonight is when Doug Teal was laid out in the road and hit by a car. So we are talking around the same time frame, just a little bit afterwards, when Doug Teal was killed. So this is Kenneth Tomlinson. He was the police captain in Fredericktown. He was 42 years old, and he was arrested in January of 2010 by the Missouri Highway Patrol. He was eventually charged with 22 counts, but he was originally arrested on 16 charges of felony charges with underage boys. Now, to make it even more disturbing, we're talking about not only a police captain, that is their version of a police chief. You also need to know that he had been on the police force since, I believe it said 1997. So he had been on the police force for years. And then he was promoted up to police captain. Then not only that, but he was the Boy Scout leader for 13 years. So he was the troop leader for the Boy Scouts. He was the police, basically the police chief in the area. And he had held that position of authority for over a decade, for the Boy Scout leader anyways. He had just recently become the police captain. But we need to also understand that this is a very large man, 6'2", almost 400 pounds at the time of his arrest. Very large man. And we find out this disturbing details in January when a concerned mother finds explicit text messages on her son's phone. Now, we're talking children from 11 to 17. Now, this boy had some very disturbing text messages from this man named Big Dog. Now, this is what he called himself. He called himself the Big Dog. And the Big Dog had sent some explicit messages to this child, and she turned it in. Now, this opened this can of worms that had been hidden in this area for a very long time. And it would come to find out that he had been 3 boys in his Boy Scout troop. Now, we don't know if he has abused more, but these are the 3 that have come forward. 2 are brothers, and then there was 1, I believe they were friends. And so what was happening here, by the time it all came out in the wash, he pled guilty to 22 counts of minors. 12 counts were first-degree statutory with 3 boys aged 17, 14, and 12 by the time he was caught. Now, to make this even worse, we have found that he also videotaped the boys and made them watch this. He showed these boys porn. He forced these boys to do all sorts of things. And so we're talking about someone who has abused his position of authority for many, many years. September 2010, he was actually sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences plus 22 years. 3 years later, in September of 2013, the boys sue their local Boy Scouts chapter because they come forward and said that there was more than 60 incidences that they personally knew of that had been reported. Tomlinson wasn't following the rules where you're supposed to not have one adult with a child. You're supposed to always have 2 adults and a child. There was more than 60 reported incidences, and yet he still got away with it. And of course he's going to get away with it because we are in Madhouse, Madison County. Now, so let's talk about this. We want to understand that there were so many problems with this from the very beginning. And this is one of 7 specific public corruption cases that have been made public in Fredericktown in Madison County, Missouri. So we need to understand. I've been going over these cases where we've got unsolved or mislabeled cases or missing persons cases. You've got all these, and then I've kind of spun through those. We've still got like 5 or 6 left that don't have a lot of information, so I'm going to dig a little bit, see if I can get some more information on the rest of the list that we have. But I thought while we're waiting for more information, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the public corruption case. Because in reality, I'll just give you a rundown. When we're talking about public corruption, I've got them all listed out here in this notebook. You've got, in 2005, the Madison County deputy was arrested because of supposedly he was stealing evidence out of the evidence lockers. And then, of course, we know that currently that has been a discussion with the current sheriff that evidence is going missing. So that shows corruption all the way back to 2005. Then there was a local cop that tried to be on the right side of things and do things right, and she ended up leaving and filing a harassment suit against the mayor of Fredericktown. So there's another public corruption. You've got a deputy that was arrested, and we'll go through that story next time. But there's he physically abused and assaulted a 14-year-old girl during interrogations because she wasn't giving him the answers that he wanted. We've got the deputy collector was arrested for stealing thousands of dollars from people's taxes. So it looked like people's taxes weren't being filed when they actually were. So we're talking about a series of public corruption cases that have been already made public. So it's not like we're talking about something that isn't already known. So girls, let's talk about this police chief, this police captain, Tomlinson. Do you feel like 3 consecutive life sentences is enough? Do you feel like he said some disturbing things on the stand in his sentencing, and I find it just made me angrier. What do you girls think? Cricket, I'll let you run with it. You know what he said on the stand, don't you?
No, actually, I don't.
I do.
Boys, Tammy, I talked to both of you about cases. Like, I'm not sure which one. Tammy, was it you that I was talking to then?
Well, I wrote it down what he said. He said, "Please know that I would never have intentionally hurt them, as I cared for them as well," is what he testified.
Oh, yeah.
And then, to make it even worse, he said, and I promise the families I will get therapy when I get behind bars.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I'm like,
too little, too late.
Yep.
Yeah.
As
So you
long as he never gets out of prison again, and I believe in jail justice.
absolutely. The only therapy, the only therapy he needs is some jailhouse therapy. Some jailhouse justice type of therapy. But okay, so let's dive into this a little bit. You got, at the time, the youngest was 11 years old when this whole when he was arrested. This had been going on for a period of time. So you're talking probably this kid was 10 years old, 9 years old when this started. Now, you're in a place where you're supposed to be safe. You're supposed to be learning how to be a man. You're supposed to be learning how, survival techniques. You're supposed to, it's actually, Boy Scouts is supposed to be more about father-son bonding and things like that as well. And yet you're there in this place where you're supposed to be safe, and your leader decides to abuse you, and you're not even 12 years old yet. You haven't even reached puberty. So you're talking about a small boy. He's not like some kind of 19-year-old 220-pound bodybuilder. He's a little bitty boy, 11 years old, and he's going up against a 6'2", 400-pound man. And from what I've read and studied, this man would get them in the front of his truck after Boy Scouts, after their meetings, and he would show them porn, and then he would make them do specific things to him or to them, and he would film them, and then he would make them watch it afterwards. So not only was he traumatizing them and manipulating them and abusing them, he was making them re-watch their trauma. And so by doing this, he was just constantly exerting power over again and over again to these children who were looking up to him as a leader. And so by doing this, he has, on so many levels, he has just made it a little worse. And then for him to come out and say, well, I'll get therapy. It's just retarded that he thinks he's going to get therapy and that's going to fix this. And then to say on the stand that he didn't intend to hurt the boys, he would have never hurt the boys. Well, what does he think he was doing? I mean, you don't do that to a child and not hurt them. I mean, you can't. What does he think hurting them means? I mean, physically, I'm sure it hurt as well. Not only just the psychological and the emotional and all that, but I'm sure physically a 400-pound man, it hurt. And so I'm thinking, is that enough? Is 3 consecutive life sentences enough? Or do you think this deserved the death penalty? What do you guys think? I know the death penalty is a touchy subject, but in this situation, do you think 3 consecutive life sentences was enough, or do you think the death penalty was more appropriate? Okay, let's see.
I feel like the death penalty is an easy out. They need to suffer every day for the rest of their lives, knowing what they did.
My thing with the death penalty is they're automatically guaranteed 20 years worth of appeals. So, but I get so angry. I'm just like, somebody take him out,
Yeah.
I'm like,
didn't one state pass the death penalty for pedophiles just recently?
Yes.
Was it Florida, maybe?
Yeah, there was one state that passed that. But my thought on it is, when it comes down to it, he hurt these boys, and they will never get over this. This will never leave them, And then, if you get on here, I don't know if she's on here today. Let me look back through the comments here.
And the fact that he chose 2 things where he is 100% trusted.
Yeah, he was 100% in control.
Yes.
They didn't have any control over the situation. you know, because he was their right home, you know.
And I know they're going to try to use this, that he was abused as a child. He went through this, that, or the other. Mm-hmm. That is an excuse.
That is.
People are evil, and there is a very small percentage of children who have been victimized and abused that grow up to be abusers themselves.
Right. Well, and see, this is the next thing. When it comes down to that, it's not guaranteed that you're going to be an abuser if you've been abused. You might have a tendency to do that, but you can break the cycle at any point in time.
Yes.
If you choose to, you know, and he chose not to, you know, and this is the thing. I don't want to make a big deal about this, and, you know, because it's not what the show's about. The show's not about this, but how many people, and you don't have to answer, just in yourself, answer, how many of you guys were abused as a child in one way or another? You know, it may not have been, sexual abuse, but it could have been abuse of any sort. How many of you guys were abused as a child and then you turn into an abuser? You know, so when it comes down to it, that's not an excuse. And the fact that they brought that up and kept trying to push that out, that to me is just asinine. That's not an excuse for anything.
No.
So, and then this is where I really get upset. When the boys came back 3 years later, the boys sued their troop because they said they personally knew of 60 incidences that were reported to the people that was over that troop. Okay. So that means these boys and their friends, or maybe just these boys, had reported the abuse 60 times, 60 times these children tried to report abuse. And it was ignored by this group of Boy Scouts. And
sorry you went through that.
That is just as disturbing as the actual abuse, because these boys were trying to get help. And this troop, whoever's over the troop, I had it written down somewhere, whoever's over the troop ignored it 60 times. How many times does a child have to come to you and say, I'm being abused, I am hurt, I need help? How many times does a child have to come up to you crying and say, I need help, for you to help? I mean, if a child comes up to me bawling their eyes out saying, I need help, I'm not going to make them ask again. I'm going to do something about it right now, you know? So I want to know, how do you ignore 60 reports of one guy? You know what I mean? It was 60 reports of the same man. Okay.
Because he was the captain of the police.
Thank you. He was a police officer, and so everybody, even the Boy Scouts are like, well, he's a cop. He's not going to do that. They're not going to believe it. They're going to push it under the rug, or even if they do believe it, they're going to push it aside. Sorry, I said it. So this is what I find disturbing. He calls himself the big dog. Well, teenagers in that area shied away from him. Why would all the teenagers shy away? You've got the younger kids that are in Boy Scouts, forced to be with him. But then by the time they get to be teenagers, they all can't stand him. They all try to run from him. They all try to hide from him. And they call him Baby Huey. Okay. And this is a known fact around the area. Teenagers avoided him. They couldn't stand him. They called him Baby Huey. Why? How many others? I know some of them probably just kind of got a feeling from the guy, but I want to know how many others has he abused? Because to me, if so many teenagers automatically avoid him and call him, Baby Huey, and avoid being alone with him, that tells me that these three boys weren't the only ones that were abused. I mean, that's the way I get it anyways.
And
Tammy?
I give those kids kudos though for speaking up.
Absolutely. And for continually,
And yes,
because that,
being brave
me,
enough
it's
to
like,
take on the fight to take them to court. That's a lot.
well, and I'm proud of the mother who went ahead and
Yes.
reported it, even though, okay, I'm going to have to report this to the police, and it is the police doing this to my son. You know how hard that was to be, to report it and stand up, even though she was standing against the actual law enforcement. That I commend her. That's the way. That's a good mom right there.
Yes.
That's what a mom should do. That's what any adult should do when a child comes to you and say, "I'm in trouble. I'm having problems. Someone's hurting me. I'm in a problem." Any child that needs help, that's the way it should respond. It should not be 60 times. This kind of behavior isn't something that just all of a sudden you wake up with these ideas and urges. Okay. This is a behavior that he has actively fantasized about and then actively slowly started engaging in. So this is the reason why I say people need to probably interview the teenagers around there, because he's probably did the peeping Tom thing, probably peeked on people first, and then he probably started, sharing pictures. Then he probably started, just having discussions he shouldn't have. See, these kinds of predators, they progress over time. They don't just start right away. So to me, there's no way in heck that he's only got 3 victims. The youngest one said that he had been abused since the day he started Boy Scout. So he literally had been abused the entire time he was in the Scouts. And so I'm sitting here going, this is something too, as parents, it's a parent's worst nightmare. It's something that no parent ever wants to think would happen on their watch. But it's also one of those things that there's a few red flags you can look for. If the child starts becoming withdrawn, if they start their habits completely changed, if they were really neat and all of a sudden they're really messy, versus if they were really messy and all of a sudden they become neat, because that's also a sign of them trying to get some control, a feeling of control in their life. There's also different flags of all of a sudden they just make every excuse in the book not to go. There's all kinds of little red flags that you can look at as a parent to kind of keep your eyes open for, things that may not seem like that much. But if you start noticing some of those, if their grades start flagging, if they start losing interest in the normal things that they love to do, different things like that. If you see an onslaught of depression or an onslaught of anger and a little bit more rage than normal, all of those things could be a sign of something. So keep your eyes open, because sometimes these things go under the radar and we miss it, because it's unfortunately the way the world works. We don't know everything that's going on with our children, even though we'd like to think we do. So if you have noticed some of those things, make sure and start doing some investigating, just to keep your child safe.
Today's episode is brought to you by Bones Coffee Company. You can forget about boring coffee when you drink Bones Coffee. Not only do they offer a variety of flavors such as strawberry cheesecake and maple bacon, they are a family-owned company that puts great detail not only in their coffee, but in the artwork that comes on each individual bag. Bones Coffee has a coffee club that will deliver your favorite coffee to your door every month. If that wasn't enough, they also have some amazing swag to offer. Check out Bones Coffee Company today. I'll have my affiliate links in the show notes for you.